Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Near Memo with me and Mike Blumenthal, fresh off his annual pig roast here to give us all the details about that, as well as talk about suspensions and other things going on in the forums, AI overview sort of slipping down the page, and also we'll be talking about sort of emerging local SEO best practices in the AI sort of search environment that we're all in right now. But before we get into it, I want to thank our sponsor, Gather Up, for supporting the podcast, gatherup.com. So be sure and check them out. And Mike, how was your pig roast? Mexican pig
Well,
roast.
it was a Mexican pig roast. That's right. We every year, this is the fourth year, we order and roast up a pig. We get it from Stryker Farms in north central Pennsylvania.
Are you burying it in the ground? Is it one of those kinds of
We
things?
we have a thing called a cajachina, which is this box designed, I don't know, it's called a cajachina, and it basically is a large oven with coals on the top, and it allows for more precision than putting it into the ground. We all chickened out on the ground thing because you can't temp it in the ground, and
Right.
we have nobody to sort of guide us when it's done. So we figured out we'd be safer and not kill anybody if we used the cajachina. So we got a cotechino for my son's graduation. I decided subsequent years that we might as well get our money's worth out of it. And so we've had a pig roast ever since. This year we had homemade tortillas, homemade salsas, including mango salsa and regular salsas, guacamole, salmon, and we had 85 people and we cooked everything ourselves. So it's a sort of a family project for friends and community.
Well, so the real question is, were you able to enjoy yourself with all the cooking and work that you have to do for something like that?
I think of the eight of us, myself, my wife, our three children, and their spouses, I think probably seven out of eight did enjoyed themselves.
I hope you were one of the ones in that category.
I had a
Oh,
blast.
good.
But
Oh, good.
I have a strong ability to ignore work that's right in front of me. And as such, in that
Important. It's an important quality in these days of
some
chronic
people,
workaholism.
right. And some people can't do that, right? So I can ignore it. Aaron Wyke can attest to this, as can David, that I can just go blithely along my own little path and have a great time. So yes, I had a great time.
Well, that's excellent. So,
All
all
right.
right, why don't we get into it? Oh, just real quickly, clarify something. You bought yourself this grill for your son's graduation?
Yes, he for graduation decided he wanted either to go to every barbecue place east of the Mississippi that was
Oh, so you
rated,
you keep it. It's his present, but you keep it at your house.
or he wanted a pig roast for his graduation. So
I
it's not
see. I
clear who.
see.
Although
It was.
owning a cajachina is a bit more of a burden than it is a pleasure because it's not one of these things that stores all that easy, right? If it's big enough to roast a pig, it's got wheels and all this stuff. So I have the obligation of storing it. I don't know who owns it.
I'm picturing
If
right now. I'm picturing right now. I don't know how many people have seen this because it's an old movie at this point. I'm picturing the final scene or the near final scene, the climax of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're in that remote area and they open the ark and the spirits come out of it and sort of slay the Nazis. I'm imagining a kind of similar thing as you open this and the the pig is there and the odors and the power of the pig is wafting through the crowd. Anyway, all right, that was just what popped into my head spontaneously, and I had to articulate it. On to the real
All
meat of
right.
the program here.
So as I've talked about frequently, I volunteer in the Google forums helping small businesses cope with for free. I get the occasional trip to a Google conference, but for free, help businesses cope with the vagaries of Google My Business. And as part of that, I track pretty closely the forum posts in aggregate. And starting in December, we saw this uptick and we traced it back to suspensions. But now we're seeing a downtick in forum posts. But what's interesting is that suspensions have stayed very high. Now, in March, I don't know, or in the beginning of April, we reported that it appeared that suspensions were dropping because they fixed a feature which caused bulk listings to get suspended. They called it a bug, but I'm pretty sure it was intentional. However, subsequent to that, suspensions have stayed very high. So, as a proportion of the total um, in the forum, suspensions are running at almost 40%, and some of the verification issues are actually suspension related. So it's actually like 42%. There were 4,745 posts this month, which is on the lower side for total posts, but 40% of 5,000 is what? 2,000 or so suspension related posts. And then you can see the other things that are going on: verification, missing reviews, fake reviews, roughly running 12, 13%. When you see that number diverge, it means that they've tightened up the algorithm one way or loosened it when you see them switch, because the flip side of missing reviews is more fake reviews in the way the algorithm works. Phone number not publishing is a huge issue out of India. There was a lot of phone hijacking in India. Google tightened it down and requires additional verification there. And then the rest of this just sort of operational issues. Listing is invisible, usually because it's new. Listing issues, duplicate listing. These are all sort of map operational issues that don't get resolved easily at some level by support. But the net of all this is that since Google has automated verification with video verification, it no longer is a cost point for them. It's no longer a cost center for them. And so they are now going back, and literally anybody who's not confidently verified in their mind or has dropped below a certain level of confidence is either getting suspended and required to re-verify or being asked to re-verify. So Google is finally cleaning up their listings. It doesn't mean there's less spam. It just means that most businesses are more likely to encounter a re-verification or suspension state. What we don't know, and we talked about this pre-show, is if suspensions are staying roughly the same, which of these other things are going down? And I hadn't really looked at that to know, so I need to go back and do some comparison to figure out which of these are actually lower.
So one interesting question is to what extent this is representative of things going on more broadly in the world. It probably is, but the people that get to the forums are more motivated, but there's some number of people who are not going into the forums to solve these issues, either because they're being addressed by an agency or somebody, or they aren't successfully addressing them, or they're giving up on them. So what is your sense about, like, how many people, is this a small fraction? Is this 50%? What is your sense of the overall kind of
right thing? I mean, this is a small fraction. Google has in the past told me the percentage. It is a small fraction of overall, but it's the most, like you said, they're the
motivated?
Noisiest. Well, motivated, but also the angriest, the loudest, the most vociferous. And Google doesn't like dealing with them themselves, so they offload them to essentially the forum. For example, on duplicate listings, Google can deal with duplicate listings where two businesses have only minor differences and they can merge them. That happens through support. But if a listing one is an SAB and one has an address, Google can't merge those through support. They have to be merged through extra special support, so they make it into the forums. These are just problems they haven't solved for. So some of these are problems they haven't solved for. Some of them are overflow because, like with suspensions and verifications, with suspensions these days, a business only gets two chances. And if you fail on those two chances, then your business is on the line, which is why these are staying high, because those people are very motivated because their business exposure is on the line. So,
how widely understood do you think that new rule is?
Well, people are learning about it experientially, right? They do it twice, they're screwed. They come
Two
to the forum.
strikes, you're out.
2 strikes, you're out. They come to the forum, which does allow for one additional escalation, but Google doesn't tell them that, right? Well, maybe they do. I don't know. So some of this, I mean, if Google can use proxies for everything, I can use a proxy. This is reality.
Okay. All right.
And I mean, the upshot of this is if you are a business and you haven't had to re-verify or haven't been suspended, you need to be in a position where if you do get it, and in virtually all the services and many legal locations, it's going to happen, you have to be ready for it. I mean, it is just because it's so cost effective for Google to double check now. I believe that they're going to continue to apply it across all 250 million profiles until they have a high degree of confidence in all the profiles. Not that all of them will get suspended, but a good percentage of them.
But to what extent, I mean, on one level, this could be characterized as sort of good practice on Google's part to just ensure accuracy. And I'm sure they would say something. If we had somebody from Google here, they would say something like that. But to what extent do you think Google is focusing on verification or trying to clean up its data because it recognizes what a asset it is? We've talked about in the larger context of sort of threats from ChatGPT and other places that Google's local graph is one of its, if not its biggest differentiators. Do you think that there's any way in which that's playing in the background in some of this activity, or speculate?
My speculation would be that they see this, they see fraud and quality of local listings as, flip sides of their ad coin. And so when local listing quality goes down and fraud goes up, that increases fraud in advertising. And I think fraud is a high risk for Google and jeopardizes their income potential. What's happened is LSAs are now totally attached to a local listing, for
Right.
example. And if you don't have a solid local listing, you can't get an LSA.
Can't do an LSA. Yep.
Can't do an LSA. So these two are now intricately tied together, as is product, right? Product is based on Google local listings. So for their strategy of local first, local best to work, they have to have a certain degree of confidence in the trustworthiness. Also, fraud results in government regulation, which we're seeing a lot of. We haven't seen a lot of it in the local.
Well, certainly bad PR, bad press for sure.
Bad press. And in, for example, the UK, they got a lot of pressure on reviews and fake LSAs, and Google fixed it. And that's rolling back out to the rest of the world now, a year later. So I think that it relates to, they've always wanted better local, but they never had the algorithms to do it. They never had the investment to do it. Now I think they have the motivation financially and the pressure socially to do it. And I think it's a combination of all that sort of stuff.
Okay, let's move into the exciting realm of AI overviews and local.
Sure.
And what a number of people have noticed that Google is sort of testing moving AI overviews down the page a bit, but you've got a specific use case that is interesting.
In local, right.
Yeah.
So historically in local, when you did a business plus reviews request, so you were just looking to understand Barbara Oliver's or Spot TV's reviews.
Brand search plus reviews.
Brand search plus reviews. Interestingly, when I do that on my iPhone and save it as a PDF, Apple, for privacy reasons, blocks it out automatically. I have no idea why.
They zap the query?
They zap the query, so maybe to avoid large scale capturing of it. Don't know. Anyways, so historically, this is what you've seen. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing AI overviews instead of the rating and the summary, right? But what we are now seeing is, at least in Spot to B's case, is the rating summary, the review summary with sort of typical reviews highlighted. And then we're seeing an AI overview, which makes a whole lot more sense. I mean, pushing the AI overview down the page from first to third is actually a very logical place to put it, because as you move through this and you click the, read more, what you then start getting is, this more narrative view of the business with reviews on multiple websites, including in Barbara's case on her website because of the use of first party reviews and
first party. Yep.
schema, but also TripAdvisor, Yelp, Great Bacon, crispy hash browns, food quality, positives, excellent breakfast, friendly service, all the negatives. So it moved, and then overall, and then you can see, some of these third-party sites, including in Google's case, plays a huge role here, and first-party reviews play a huge role. So they'll show those before they'll show.
So what are the directories? TripAdvisor, Yelp. It looks like Yelp is.
This is
there.
food. So yeah, TripAdvisor and Yelp, and they mentioned MapQuest because she doesn't have first-party reviews.
Strangely,
right?
Strangely.
Yes. And you can see that here. Well, Facebook, Yelp, TripAdvisor twice. So this is to me, a likely ending point where AI overviews become merged into good search results And when the knowledge graph delivers better results, like in this case, the knowledge graph is delivering better results. And here's an AI summary, a very brief summary, and then a much longer, more narrative summary. That to me, but notice how far it pushes any
Everything, yeah,
organic website down the page here,
way,
right?
way down.
Way,
You're
way
not
down.
gonna. I mean, as a practical matter, you're not gonna look at organic websites in this
Right.
context. I mean, you're here to look at a review for a particular brand that you've identified, so you're going to get that information from the top, and maybe
Exactly.
some people will scroll.
And we've seen in our research where, like in Germany and France, people actually go in and read reviews. In the United States,
Not so
50% of
much.
them. In the United
Yeah,
States, not so much. But we did see a number of people doing this query, brand plus reviews, and looking at this and looking at reviews around the web. This will service them, I think, very well. I mean, what it means is reviews are increasingly important. First party reviews, review
yep,
diversity are all increasingly
yep,
important. But I think we will see less and less people diving in and actually reading the reviews when they get this many reviews. The only negative here is the orange juice, while available at every table, can taste watered down or not quite right. But I think this to me is the future of reviews. And I think Google is the company to drive it because they're generating a billion reviews a year.
right. Well, as we've discussed in other contexts, Amazon's sort of AI assistant Rufus that they put on the
Mm-hmm.
that you can access on mobile. I don't think it's on the desktop, but maybe. Um, it is actually quite useful. Google has Ask Maps about this place or whatever they're calling it now, where you can ask questions about, you could ask essentially the kinds of questions that are surfaced in the AI overview.
Yeah, particularly, I think you mentioned that they're also talking about return percentages. So when you take an AI summary with a return percentage, that's like a great proxy
Yep.
for
Yep.
what you're looking to do, which is avoid a headache, right?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because the way that I use it now. So I stopped reading Amazon reviews because of review fraud. I just stopped looking at Amazon as a recommendation source for products. And what I typically do is I go to some other source, an editorial review, or my own research. I identify the product, and then I may go to Amazon to buy it without looking at the reviews. But now with Rufus, what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out certain things. Is this a product that's returned frequently? What do people say? What do people like about this? What do people not like about it? So I can ask those kinds of questions, and most of the time it has a pretty good answer. And it's taking that information from either the product details on the page or the reviews, and it's a much more efficient kind of tool. Now, in a restaurant context, you're not going to be spending lots and lots of time trying to figure things out. But, and I don't know how widely Google will extend this Ask Maps functionality to products or other things, but it's pretty interesting. It's a kind of painful thing to read a lot of reviews, which is why we don't see people reading them except in cases of higher consideration purchases where they're more careful and want to find out, more detail about certain points, healthcare, legal, and other categories that we've seen in our own user research. This also helps Google with whatever potential antitrust complaints about AI overviews at the top of the page. Making them more dynamic or sliding them further down the page is a way to sort of, beyond the logic of this presentation. It's a way to sort of mollify critics in a sense.
While
But
still self-preferencing their own
yeah,
review content.
yeah, their own review content is self-preferencing, but they maintain that it's people are used to seeing this, and so they would the way in which this is sort of constructed, they can make a plausible argument. This really isn't self-preferencing. We're just presenting all this third-party information, blah, blah.
And I have to agree. I find this sort of tiered approach very effective. Quick
It's better.
look, more detail, a lot of detail with a strong narrative. I find it to be pretty good.
When you say brand plus reviews, you don't want a freaking short story there that you have to read through. You want to see what the reviews are. And then for those people that want to go deeper, this is a nice treatment of that.
Yes. To me, this is an effective use of AIOs as opposed to, dropping a pile of AIO on top of everything else.
Exactly. All right. So let's move on to the third item today, which is a kind of an expansion of that. Uh, if you go to LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn and you're in the sort of world of SEO, what you're seeing kind of every other post is some AI overview, AI mode, some tool vendor saying X% of clicks are not happening. And then you've got people theorizing about why this or that. And then there's all the sort of naming discussion. Should it be called GO or AEO or AIO or SEO? And there's just an enormous amount of conversation about AI and how to optimize, with some people saying it's radically different than SEO and other people saying, well, it's just kind of SEO plus some other best practices.
And some people saying it's the same as it's been for the last 5 years.
Right. And we want to kind of sidestep that to some degree. There was an interesting blog post that I wrote about a little bit from a guy named Hans Kronenberg, who did an analysis of both a leaked Claude system prompt, and most recently this week, ChatGPT. So ChatGPT 4.0. And basically, one of the interesting things is that it reveals is when ChatGPT, and this was true for Claude, goes out to the web to search versus answering questions with its own internal training data. And very briefly, what he says the system prompt leak reveals is that ChatGPT 4.0 will go to the web to get real-time or current information, weather, sports results are the examples, location information, so local business information or events in the area, hard to find or niche topics that aren't in the training data, and then the more ambiguous situations where outdated information could be harmful. And then he goes on to provide an example that's kind of more ambiguous and expansive. But what was interesting to me
basically informational queries are in there.
Yes.
Local queries are not in there, right?
Well, so this was the interesting, right? This is the interesting thing to contemplate is there's no local data in the training set. And I guess the answer is no. If they're going to the web every time to search for local information, then it would appear not by implication. But that was a little bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah, to me, it isn't, because they don't have knowledge graphs, and local data is most accurately delivered in the form of that graph, and they don't have access to it. They maybe have access to Bings, I don't know, and review data is a very current sort of topical thing. It's always changing.
They could
businesses go in and out of business. What is the rate of change? You probably know this better, but isn't it 20% every year or something, or 25%?
I don't know what it is, the current number off the top of my head, but there's a lot of businesses that fail. Yeah. There's, when Google first got into this space, it was working with big data aggregators like InfoUSA, which is now, I believe, Data Axle, that compiled these massive databases with a bunch of points for each business using different methodologies, crawling and phone verification and other things.
Scanning phone books. Remember the whole scandal?
Yeah, that was the very beginning. That was the very beginning of it all. People shipping phone books offshore and having low wage workers in other markets key in data. That was the very, very beginning. So they could do stuff like that. They could certainly purchase some of these databases with all their billions and billions.
In fact, Google had a tacit agreement with the Yellow Pages to do just that. When Chris Silversmith worked there, that was the agreement, that Google could scrape Yellow Page data.
Super Pages, yeah, and
what
in
is
Yellow
now
Pages,
Super Pages.
Yeah, what if it still exists? And there was a debate at the time. We don't need to digress too far down this road here, but
it just shows how old we both are.
Yeah, there was a debate at the time about whether it was smart for these Yellow Pages publishers who did have data at the time that Google didn't have to license their data or allow this kind of activity versus kind of hoarding it and keeping it in-house to present themselves as having unique information. This is the same discussion in a way that's going on right now with lots of content publishers and ChatGPT and the other AI sites. Should they allow them to be included in the training data? Should they license their data? What is the long-term impact of that on those publishers? I mean, we can't answer that right now, but if the Yellow Pages is any indication, it's not going to be good. Let's talk about
damned if they do, damned if they don't, though, right? I mean, Google's going to pay you maybe pennies on the dollar or they're going to steal it. And then you're going to have to fight them in court. I mean, it's kind of like the citizens of Gorm in Rogue One, right? The Empire is going to destroy it no matter what the partisans do. I mean, so you could be peaceful, you could start a rebellion, the Empire is going to destroy it. And I think that's true in these data scenarios. When these massively funded companies want this data, like I said, they're either going to pay you pennies on the dollar for it, or they're going to take it and then fight you in court for the next 10 years, at which point you're out of business, regardless.
Well, and this is kind of a problem with the Cloudflare plan, Cloudflare plan. They are allowing publishers that they work with to enable crawlers to access their content for free without any restrictions, to requiring them to pay them or blocking it entirely. The challenge there is that AI, I almost said Google, these AI crawlers will go somewhere else and get the same information.
That's the other threat. That's correct.
And the prisoner's dilemma is, if I disallow my content to the AI, will my competitors be appearing there? Will they get the benefit of that? And meanwhile, I'm excluded. I mean, this is one of the challenges with dealing with a behemoth like ChatGPT or Google or anybody that has, and the degree to which there's lots of information duplicated online. But
well, it creates a dilemma. It created a dilemma for us. Do we go behind a paywall? Do we leave it out there? How do we make a living? And ultimately, we decided as a niche player that we were better off, for the most part, with a paywall, even if it's free paywall for a lot of our content. We're better off just trying to find the people that. Free wall. Trying to find the people that want to read what we have to write, and we can just sort of go down that path and develop a clientele. If you're dependent upon search for your daily food, it's always a devil's bargain, right?
Right. So we're sort of living the dream of ignoring Google in a certain way.
Yeah. Of ignoring Google in an impoverished way. Yes.
All right. So
dream.
Let's talk about what I really wanted to talk about. That was an extended contextual preamble. All right.
So don't get me distracted. It's all I can say,
So
it's all your fault.
What's interesting, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? So with all the discussion of how to optimize and how to show up, and is it different? Is it the same? What's kind of emerging is a set of at the risk of invoking the cliche, best practices for local that are not very different from what people have always been recommending for local SEO. It's a kind of a local SEO plus strategy. And you can correct me, but what I see here is GBP is the sort of centerpiece in a certain way of the whole thing, claimed and fully optimized. Reviews on key local verticals or other sites that are meaningful in the category. Schema, of course. First-party reviews, as we just discussed a moment ago. Bing places, because of ChatGPT's use of that data. I'm blanking on a couple other things. I didn't.
Brand mentions.
Yes, develop your brand on other channels for prominence.
So I would frame this in the context of the old graphic I did in 2010, which is owning your own equity. At the center of this, your website, your data, your first-party reviews.
Right.
And then around it, drawing in concentric circles, the data you can influence to influence these various things. Social, YouTube, Google, other review sites, primary directories, right? Those are all things that are around you that you can influence. And then around that is the paid environment, where you're basically pay to play, leveraging these various attributes in those various contexts, right? And
that's a general visibility strategy, I think, right?
Right. And it still applies, right? You just have to, again, social, YouTube, Google, TikTok, Instagram.
But I think
primary directories.
I think what is different now, the other thing was you just have to be clear on which directories are being used. So this is AI mode, AI overviews, and ChatGPT. That's sort of the cluster plus Google. You have to leverage these other channels to build your brand. Previously, it was simply exposure, which still holds, or maybe these channels result in conversions. That still holds true, but now you really have to build some sort of prominence and awareness. That's kind of always been a thing, but people didn't think about it in the context of brand. They thought about it as, this is another channel for me to, gain exposure or awareness. But really, what you want is you want to drive brand mentions, spot to be plus reviews on Google. You don't want to have to compete in the category search context to the extent that that's avoidable.
Well, and the more you do, what we learned from the leaks is the more brand searches you can generate, the more
The
brand
more
interest you can generate, the more broader queries you're going to get as well.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. It's a sort of a virtuous cycle.
Virtuous cycle. And so it's very similar with reviews. The more you get, the more you get. You remember my third base dive bar experiment? They became what started out as an effort to get Google to show dive bars in local by getting reviews at Yelp for third base dive bar.
Right.
Started a whole cascade of events that they had no knowledge about, where they started getting more and more reviews at Yelp, disputing that they were a dive bar, disputing they were a sports bar, or lauding their things. And ultimately, now when you search for best bar in Olean, this bar that I initially promoted as a dive bar has become one of the best bars in Olean by Google standards as a result. It's a virtual cycle across all these different relevant elements.
Right. But what's different now is the sort of return to attention to third-party sites that many people,
Correct.
many SEOs were ignoring. Citations diminished in importance. People were focused pretty exclusively on Google reviews, Google business profile optimization. You now need, because of the expansion of sources that are happening through AI, through ChatGPT, you need to pay attention to key directories that are being cited and used, including Yelp in many instances. And you need to extend your review. I mean, this is the topic we addressed with Darren a couple of weeks ago. You need to extend reviews to other places, including first-party reviews, as you mentioned. So there's an expansion of your efforts, and then all the brand stuff. And local is different from other kinds of companies that are looking to drive traffic to their websites that rely on advertising or rely on online conversions, because ultimately the transaction is offline. Ultimately, somebody is going to walk into a store or call a business or contact a business, and there's offline fulfillment. So it's really just about discovery, identification of the best version of whatever you're looking for, and then the transaction is happening mostly offline. And these concerns about informational queries or the top of the funnel or the question being answered without a click, as we've discussed previously, don't apply equally to local, except from a content strategy standpoint, potentially. Like if you're trying to do top of the funnel educational stuff and AI can answer those, then your content's not going to be seen. Health information that might get you a click to your site, that may not be a viable strategy anymore. Although Darren was talking about blogging, that he liked blogging again.
Within a limited content silo. I don't think he was talking about high level informational queries. And we saw when we did medical research several years ago that informational queries were only going high level queries. What is this disease? What is that
to
disease?
Google's trusted sources, to brands that people click on.
And I think that's largely going to be true in ChatGPT and any of the others as well. I think what Darren was talking about was an information silo where you have terms that convert and you expand around those terms. He uses a blog to do it. It's one strategy. The problem is that unless you're sophisticated, you forget to bring them into that particular information silo with links and categorization and so on. So it works equally well if you just take the really important content and bring it into the information silo and write it as a page and cross-link it within the silo. But whether you do it with a blog or you do it with content, you have an information silo for every service or product category that you want to be dealing with, and it could be in a blog or it could be on your site.
One of the other things that's being talked about quite a bit is the degree of overlap or lack thereof of information sources that AIO reviews, AI Mode, or ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude are using. So there's relatively little overlap going on. So that creates some choices that need to be made about which sites do you pay attention to. It's Reddit over here, it's Wikipedia, it's Quora, it's YouTube. And so that, I think, varies by vertical. I mean, I think the only AI site right now, I use Perplexity quite a bit. The public at large is not currently, although their search volume is growing. So you really need to sort of take a look at, do searches on all these places, look at the research and have a sense of what are the sources that are being used, and do some kind of 80-20 strategy where you focus on a few places that really matter, and then ignore the rest of the stuff because nobody has time
But
to
those
do
places also influence Google, right? I mean, if you've got
Yes, of
reviews from
course.
around the web at TripAdvisor, if you're spot to be and you get on the 10 best list at TripAdvisor
It's a
and the
prominence
10
thing. It's a
and you
prominence
get
thing.
on the 10 best list at Yelp, it's going to help you every place, Google included. What we
Right.
don't know is how this plays out 5 years from now, but it doesn't matter. I mean, and the name of it doesn't matter other than to satisfy either the
Meaning
self, it might
GOAO, AIO, SEO, SBO,
SEO
SX. Yeah.
doesn't matter. What matters is for the small business is conversions and putting yourself in places where you can be found and seen and your ability to handle those when they do come in, right? I mean, for me, the biggest failure in most of these marketing campaigns isn't whatever marketing you do. It's the small business being incapable of answering the phone
Well,
or
it's just
processing the
business.
form.
It's business basics, right? I mean, that was
Right.
Aaron Waike's research about how it's taking so long for many of these businesses to respond to leads. Yeah,
Correct.
this is the thing that gets lost in the discussion is that you've just got to build a great service or product, as the case may be, and support it and do a great job with the customer experience, and that will take care of some of this stuff on its own.
To bring this full circle in getting ready for the pig roast, we wanted our house washed because we have plastic siding and it tends to get a little mildewy. You know, you can see the little, whatever it is, algae because of the trees around the house. So I tried to find a house cleaning service. And the one that I finally went with, I filled out a form and they literally called me within the hour and they came when they said they were going to come to give me a quote. And they did what they said they were going to do in the quote. And I asked him how he did it. And he said, well, my wife answers she works at the local bank or wherever, but she answers all my emails for me and all my text messages and tells me when I need to do something. So they set up and I literally
Old
call,
school.
well, old school on the back end, but they were visible on the front end. In other words, all the four others, it was like, oh my God. You know, I went through four house cleaners and one came and couldn't do it.
Nobody
Half of them didn't
responds.
respond or took them 2 weeks
Yeah,
to respond. And this company responded right away. But the way they did it was, I thought, very creative. And it's what you got to
that
do.
that's what she's doing at the bank instead of doing her bank work, is she's responding
Now
to her
she's doing it
husband's
on
leads.
her coffee break once an hour, right? She
You
takes
hope
5 minutes.
you hope so.
I'm sure so. I mean, if she works half as hard as he works hard, she'd probably work harder because she's running two
Well,
businesses. So.
this is a great illustration of this kind of just business 101 basics that people that get lost in these marketing discussions that are so, title tags and schema and all of this stuff. It's really just deliver a good service. I mean, I don't know how many small businesses I've worked with, for home services and other contexts, and the ones that get the job are typically the ones that respond the fastest. They need to be competitive, but they're just, there are just so many instances where 24 hours, 48 hours goes by, there's no response. That person is off the list pretty quickly, especially if their competitors are coming in and responding within an hour or within a couple of hours.
Exactly.
It's just no-brainer stuff, but very hard for some of these people to
So,
do.
so in conclusion, it doesn't matter whether you do AEO and SEO and
SBO,
GEO,
SXO, AIO,
UX
EIEIO.
evaluation. If you don't answer your phone, it doesn't make a goddamn bit of difference.
But there are technology tools out there, and I'm not going to make a plug for anybody. There are technology tools out there that will do some of these things on an automated basis or with your involvement that make it less likely that things fall through the cracks. And it's important.
It
That's
is
important.
important. And
All right.
with that,
Yes,
don't forget to thank Gather Up for being a sponsor. If you would be
absolutely.
interested in sponsoring us, reach out to G Sterling at nearmedia.co. We'll have an opening next quarter, so feel free to reach out.
Or Mike, you can equally contact Mike.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to. I'm good at avoiding work. Remember, that was how we started this
Oh,
whole
that's true.
conversation.
That's true.
And I just demonstrating the technique. I'm
Yes,
modeling it.
that's right. That's right. So the burden is on me. The burden is on me to respond quickly then.
Absolutely. We got to run a good business, damn it.
All right.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much for listening. Tell your friends, and we'll see you next time.